I never believed in the supernatural until that day in 2004. I still have trouble talking about it, but I need to get this off my chest. I was a firefighter with Station 14 for nearly 20 years, and I've seen some shit. House fires, car wrecks, industrial accidents, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what happened during that training drill at the abandoned Dimmock Women's Prison. The place had been shut down since the 1970s, but the main structure dated back to the 1800s. It was this massive, imposing sandstone building with tiny windows and walls that seemed to absorb all light. The county used it occasionally for training exercises because the layout was challenging. Narrow corridors, multiple levels, and these old cellar tunnels that honeycombed beneath the main building. It was mid-July, hot as hell outside. I remember sweating in my turnout gear as we assembled in the parking lot. The sun was beating down, had to be at least 90 degrees, and the humidity made it feel like we were breathing through a wet towel. My crew that day included Jackson, Martinez, Cooper, and this newer guy, Mike Reeves, who'd only been with us about 8 months. Captain Harris briefed us on the drill. Standard search and rescue scenario. We'd practice finding and extracting a downed firefighter in a zero-visibility environment. Mike got picked to be our victim. He didn't seem too bothered. Actually looked kind of relieved he wouldn't have to lug the rescue equipment through the building. I'll never forget watching Mike follow the drill instructor, Sergeant Phelps, into the building. Mike gave us this little salute like, "See you guys in a bit," before disappearing through those heavy metal doors. They were heading to the dungeon level. That's what everyone called the old isolation cells in the lowest level of the prison. The rest of us stayed outside, getting our gear ready. We'd be using blacked-out masks on our SCBAs, self-contained breathing apparatus, to simulate smoke conditions. Jackson was complaining about the heat, saying how he couldn't wait to get into the cool building, if only we'd known. We were maybe 15 minutes into prep when I heard the metal doors slam open. I turned, expecting to see Sergeant Phelps coming out to give us further instructions. Instead, I saw Mike, running, stumbling across the parking lot, his face completely drained of color. His SCBA was half off, hanging from one shoulder, and he wasn't wearing his helmet. At first, I thought it was part of the drill, maybe a new wrinkle Phelps had thrown in. But then I saw Mike's face up close. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated with fear. He was hyperventilating, trying to speak but unable to form words. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't even grip the water bottle Martinez offered him. "What the hell happened?" Captain Harris demanded. But Mike just shook his head, taking in these huge gulps of air. "There's something..." He finally managed, his voice cracking. "There's something fucking down there. It's not normal. It's not fucking normal." We all kind of looked at each other, not sure what to think. Mike wasn't the type to joke around, especially not during drills. He was one of those by-the-book guys, always serious about training. After a few minutes, he calmed down enough to tell us what happened. Phelps had positioned him in one of the old isolation cells, a small room with sandstone walls about 8 by 10 feet. The plan was for Mike to lie on the floor, pretending to be unconscious, while Phelps came back up to guide us through the scenario. "I was just lying there," Mike said, his voice steadier, but still tight with fear. It was dark, but not pitch black. Some light came in from the corridor. I was on my back just waiting when the temperature just dropped. According to Mike, the temperature plummeted in a matter of seconds. Not gradually, not slightly. We're talking a 40 or 50 degree drop. He said it went from cool to freezing almost instantly. I could see my breath, he told us, rubbing his arms at the memory. It was like someone had opened a door to a meat locker. My skin was burning from the cold. That was weird enough, but what happened next was what sent him running. As he was lying there, trying to figure out what could cause such a dramatic temperature change, he felt something grab his shoulder, not a tap or a nudge, a violent, forceful grab that actually lifted his shoulder off the ground. It was like a hand, he said, his eyes fixed on some distant point as he recalled it. But bigger, stronger than any person I've ever felt. The fingers dug in. I can still feel where they pressed. He showed us his shoulder, and sure enough, there were 4 distinct red marks visible through his t-shirt. They looked almost like bruises beginning to form. Mike said he instinctively reached for his flashlight and switched it on, sweeping it around the room. There was nothing there, at least nothing he could see. But he swears he felt a presence, something massive and angry, filling that small space with him. I knew I needed to get out, he said. It wasn't a thought process, it was pure instinct. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run. By this point, Sergeant Phelps had joined us, looking confused. He confirmed he'd left Mike alone only minutes before, and nothing unusual had happened while he was down there. Now, I've known Mike for years. He's not one for dramatics or ghost stories. He's a practical guy with a mechanical engineering background who approaches problems logically. Seeing him this rattled didn't sit right with any of us. Captain Harris decided we needed to check it out. Part of me thought we'd find a perfectly logical explanation. Maybe an old refrigeration unit had kicked on, or there was some kind of natural phenomenon in the sandstone that could cause temperature fluctuations. Another part of me, though, was deeply uneasy. About 20 of us went back into the building, including guys from other crews who'd been preparing for different drills. We moved through the main floor, down a set of concrete stairs, and then down another flight that led to the dungeon level. The air got noticeably cooler as we descended, but that seemed normal for a basement area. The dungeon level was a network of narrow corridors with isolation cells branching off. The walls were rough-hewn sandstone, discolored with age and dampness. The only light came from our flashlights, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Phelps led us to the cell where he'd left Mike. It was at the end of a corridor, slightly separated from the others. As we approached, I felt the temperature drop dramatically. It wasn't a gradual change. One step I was comfortable, the next I was freezing. Several guys remarked on it simultaneously. "Jesus, you feel that?" Martinez whispered, his breath immediately visible in the beam of his flashlight. The cell itself was small and bare, with just 3 sandstone walls and metal bars making up the 4th. There was nothing inside except dust and a small drain in the center of the floor. Nothing that could explain what Mike had experienced. While we stood there, the temperature continued to drop until it was painful to breathe. The cold had a weight to it, a presence that seemed to press against my skin. My flashlight began to dim, then flicker, though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. Cooper moved to the center of the cell where Mike had been lying. "There's nothing here," he said, but his voice sounded thin, uncertain. I stepped in behind him, and that's when I felt it. A sensation of being watched that was so intense it made the hair on my arms stand up despite the cold. I swept my flashlight around, half expecting to see someone in the corners, but there was nothing visible. Then Martinez, who was standing just outside the cell, suddenly jerked backwards, slapping at his turnout coat. "Something pulled me," he said, his voice cracking. I felt something tug on my coat, hard. We all backed out of the cell then. None of us willing to admit how badly we wanted to run, just like Mike had. We maintained our composure, walking quickly but deliberately back toward the stairs. I was second to last in line, with only Jackson behind me. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, Jackson called out, "Hold up!" We all turned to see him standing about 10 feet back, staring at something on the wall. He pointed his flashlight at a section of sandstone. "Was this here before?" he asked. We gathered around, and I felt my blood run cold. There, scratched deep into the sandstone, was a crude drawing of what looked like a person lying down, with a larger misshapen figure standing over them. It hadn't been there when we walked in. I'm certain of it. We'd all been scanning the walls with our flashlights on the way in, and nobody had mentioned seeing anything like this. That was enough for Captain Harris. He ordered everyone out immediately, and nobody argued. We climbed the stairs in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The relief when we stepped back into the July heat was overwhelming. The training was cancelled for the day. In the parking lot, we gathered around Mike, who'd been waiting anxiously by the trucks. When we told him about the temperature drop and what Martinez had felt, he just nodded, like he was receiving confirmation of something he already knew. "What about the marks?" I asked him. "Can we see your shoulder again?" Mike pulled down his collar and we all leaned in. The marks were darker now, unmistakably in the pattern of 4 fingers and a thumb. A massive hand that had grabbed him with enough force to leave bruises. The county launched an investigation, checking the building for gas leaks, faulty electrical systems, anything that could explain what happened. They found nothing. The dungeon level was examined by structural engineers who confirmed there was no active cooling system or natural phenomenon that could cause such a rapid temperature drop. A week later, I went back with Captain Harris and a team from the Historical Society who'd heard about the incident. They were interested because they'd been collecting stories about the prison's history. Apparently, in the late 1800s, that particular isolation cell had been used to punish the most difficult women, those who fought back against the guards or tried to escape. According to their records, several women had died in that cell under mysterious circumstances. We didn't find anything unusual during that daytime visit, no temperature drops, no strange markings. But the historian showed us something that made my skin crawl. In their archives, they had a journal kept by a prison doctor from 1879. He had documented the case of a woman who'd been found dead in that cell with what he described as inexplicable contusions resembling a large handprint upon her shoulder. Mike never went back to that building. In fact, he transferred to a different station the following month. Last I heard, he'd left firefighting altogether and moved to another state. I don't know what was in that cell with Mike that day. I don't know what caused the temperature to drop or what scratched that drawing into solid sandstone while we were down there. I don't have an explanation for why the same handprint pattern that marked a woman in 1879 appeared on Mike in 2004. What I do know is that 20-some firefighters, practical, level-headed men and women who deal in reality and facts, all experience something that defies explanation. And not one of us has ever volunteered for a training exercise at Dimmock Prison since. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, freezing cold despite the blankets, with the unshakable feeling that something is watching me from the dark corners of my bedroom. And in those moments, I'm right back in that sandstone cell, feeling whatever presence was there reach out across time, trying to grab hold. Story 2. I've never shared this before, not fully. I tried once when I was little, but nobody believed me. I'm 16 now, and I still can't sleep without my hair tied up or tucked safely under my pillow. I still can't sleep on the edge of any bed. Some things just stay with you, you know? It happened when I was 6. My family wasn't well off, so my brothers and I shared this tiny bedroom in our old house. There was barely enough space for the 3 of us. Me, my twin brother Ethan, and our older brother James, who was 9 at the time. We had this full-sized bed that we all squeezed into. I always got stuck in the middle because I was the smallest. That night started like any other. Mom tucked us in around 8:30. James complained about having to share with babies like he always did, but Mom just kissed his forehead and told him to be a good big brother. I remember I was wearing my favorite pink pajamas with little unicorns on them. My hair was down that night. I usually wore it in braids, but Mom had washed it earlier and it was still a bit damp when bedtime came around. I fell asleep pretty quickly. I was always a deep sleeper back then. That's what makes what happened next so weird. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. Not a loud noise or anything. Just this weird feeling. You know when you can feel someone watching you? It was like that. At first I just laid there with my eyes closed, trying to fall back asleep. That's when I felt it. A gentle tug on my hair, not painful, just deliberate. Like when someone wants your attention and they pull your sleeve. Except it was my hair. I thought it was one of my brothers messing with me. Ethan was always playing pranks. So I turned to my right where Ethan was sleeping, but he was completely out. His back to me, making these little snoring sounds he always made. I checked on James on my left, but he was facing the wall, his breathing slow and even. My heart started beating faster. If it wasn't my brothers, then who pulled my hair? I felt another small tug, and this time I knew exactly where it was coming from, the foot of the bed, where my hair was dangling over the edge. I was terrified to look, but I had to know. So I slowly sat up a little and looked toward the end of the bed. What I saw makes me feel sick even now, 10 years later. There was this figure, completely black. Not like a person wearing black clothes, black like when you close your eyes on a moonless night. It was like a hole in the world, a person-shaped absence of everything. The only definition I could make out was this wild, spiky hair, like those emo kids used to wear back then, all sticking up and out in jagged points. The thing was bent over the foot of the bed, like it had been standing, and was now lowering itself to the floor. Its hand, or what I assume was its hand, was still tangled in the ends of my hair. I couldn't see a face. I don't know if it even had one. It was just emptiness in the shape of a person. I tried to scream, but at first nothing came out. My throat closed up from fear. Then finally, I let out this high-pitched shriek that hurt my own ears. The figure jerked back, letting go of my hair, and seemed to sink straight through the floor. My mum came running in seconds later, flipping on the light. My brothers were both startled awake, confused and annoyed. Mom asked what was wrong, looking around the room frantically. By then, whatever I'd seen was gone. There was someone here, I managed to whisper. They were pulling my hair. Mom checked under the bed, in the closet behind the door, everywhere. James rolled his eyes and said I probably just had a nightmare. Ethan was already falling back asleep. See? Nothing here, sweetheart, Mom said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Just a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. I know what dreams feel like. This was real. The gentle tug on my hair was real. That thing was real. I was too scared to tell her exactly what I'd seen. I had this weird thought that if I described it out loud, if I put it into words, it would somehow make it more real. Like talking about it would invite it back, and next time it might do more than just pull my hair. Mom stayed with me until I fell back asleep, but I kept my hair wrapped tightly around my hand, tucked under my body where nothing could reach it. The next morning, everyone acted like nothing had happened. Mom asked if I slept okay after my nightmare, and my brothers teased me for waking them up. I tried to tell them again that something had been in our room, but they all brushed it off. For the next few days, I was jumpy and terrified of bedtime. I started wearing my hair in a tight bun to sleep, making sure not a single strand could hang over the edge of the bed. I also began sleeping curled up in the very middle of the bed, as far from the edges as possible. About a week after it happened, I tried telling my first-grade teacher, Mrs. Bennett. We were doing this sharing circle thing, and when it was my turn, I said, "Something came into my room and pulled my hair when I was sleeping." The class got quiet. Mrs. Bennett gave me this concerned look and asked me to explain. So I did. I told her about the black figure with the spiky hair and how it disappeared when I screamed. Some kids laughed. Tyler Miller said I was making it up for attention. Mrs. Bennett just patted my shoulder and said, "What a creative imagination you have, Olivia." Then she quickly moved on to the next kid. After school, I overheard her talking to my mum, saying something about night terrors and how they're common at this age. Mom nodded along, glancing at me with a worried expression. But it wasn't a night terror. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. For months after, I became obsessive about bedtime routines. I made Mom check under the bed and in the closet every night. I started sleeping with this little nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling. I never, ever let my hair hang off the bed again. Even after we moved to a different house when I was 8, I kept the same habits. My new room was just mine, no more sharing with my brothers. But that almost made it worse. Now there was no one else in the room with me, no one to scream for if that thing came back. By the time I was 10, I'd convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it had been a weird hallucination or something. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was half asleep and imagined it. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks. I wanted so badly to believe that. Then one night when I was 12, I woke up suddenly at 3 in the morning, for no reason, just wide awake. And I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to check my hair. I reached up and felt that my braid had come loose while I was sleeping. A few strands were hanging off the side of the bed, and though I couldn't see anything in the darkness of my room, I felt it. That same presence from 6 years earlier, that sense of wrongness in the air. I yanked my hair back so fast I hurt my neck. I scrambled to turn on my bedside lamp, heart pounding like it was trying to break through my ribs. There was nothing there, of course, but I didn't sleep the rest of that night, or the next. I started sleeping with my hair in a swim cap for a while after that, which earned me endless teasing from my brothers when they found out. I'm 16 now, and I still can't bring myself to sleep with my hair down. I still can't sleep near the edge of any bed. At sleepovers, my friends think I'm weird because I always take the middle spot if we're sharing a bed, or I push the sleeping bag against the wall if we're on the floor. I've researched shadow people and other phenomena over the years. I've read accounts from other people who've seen similar things. Some say they're interdimensional beings, some say they're demons. Others say they're just sleep paralysis or hallucinations. All I know is what I experienced. All I know is the absolute terror of seeing that featureless black figure with its jagged silhouette, its hand in my hair. All I know is that 10 years later, I still wake up sometimes with that feeling of being watched. I don't know what it wanted from me, why it chose me, why it only pulled my hair instead of doing something worse. Maybe I got lucky. Maybe screaming scared it off before it could do whatever it intended to do. Or maybe it's just waiting. Maybe one night I'll get careless, let my guard down, and I'll feel that gentle tug on my hair again. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. In the dreams, I can't scream. In the dreams, it pulls and pulls, dragging me over the edge of the bed and into some place I can't describe. A place that isn't a place at all, just emptiness and cold and that spiky-haired silhouette coming closer and closer. I wake up from those dreams with my hands clutching my hair protectively. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I've stopped trying to convince people. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know that even now, a decade later, I still check under my bed every night. I still sleep with my hair securely tucked away. I still wake up sometimes with the certainty that something is in my room, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. Some things you just can't forget, no matter how much you want to. Some visitors leave a mark that never really goes away. Story 3, : I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. It's been 15 years, and I've never found an explanation that makes sense. I was 12 years old then, the 4th oldest in our family of 9 kids. Yeah, 9 of us. Mom and Dad were Catholic and took the be fruitful and multiply thing pretty seriously. We lived in this old Victorian house in western Pennsylvania. It wasn't fancy or anything, just big enough to fit all of us. My sister Abigail and I shared a room on the 2nd floor at the end of this long hallway. My 3 older siblings had their own rooms, and the 4 younger ones were split between 2 bedrooms across the hall. It was a Tuesday night in October. I remember because we'd just finished this big science project about the solar system, and I was exhausted. After dinner, I just wanted to crash in bed with my Game Boy. Around 9:30, I heard my mom scream, not like an "I saw a spider" scream, but this primal, terrified sound that made my stomach drop. I ran out into the hallway and saw my parents standing at my sister Molly's doorway. Molly was 16 then, the second oldest. Dad's face was white as a sheet, and Mom was covering her mouth with her hand, trembling. "Everyone downstairs now," Dad said in this weird, tight voice I'd never heard before. We all gathered in the living room. Even my oldest brother Jake came back from his friend's house when Dad called him. You could feel the tension, like static electricity before a storm. Dad cleared his throat. "There's blood on Molly's doorframe. A lot of it, at the top." We all started talking at once, but he held up his hand. "I need to know who did this, right now." Nobody said anything. I was confused. Why would any of us smear blood on a doorframe? "This isn't funny," Mum said. Her voice was shaking. "Someone could be hurt. If one of you did this as a prank, you need to tell us now." Molly spoke up. "I didn't even notice it when I went to my room after dinner." Dad took us all upstairs, one by one, to show us. I'll never forget what I saw. Across the top of Molly's doorframe, spanning almost the entire length, were these dark, reddish-brown smears. Not just a few drops. It looked like someone had deliberately run their hand across it, leaving thick, uneven streaks. Some parts were still slightly wet, glistening in the hallway light. The metallic copper smell of blood was unmistakable. "That's a lot of blood," my brother Jake said quietly. Dad nodded. "Too much to be from a nosebleed or small cut." I felt sick looking at it. The smears had this deliberate quality to them, like finger marks dragged across the wood. Whoever or whatever had done this wanted it to be seen. "Everyone, show me your hands," Dad demanded. We all held out our hands, front and back. Nothing, no cuts, no dried blood under fingernails, nothing suspicious at all. "Check your sheets, your clothes, everything," Mom said. "If someone's hurt, we need to know." We all scattered to our rooms. I tore through my bed, checking under pillows, inspecting my pajamas and clothes from earlier. Nothing. When we regrouped downstairs 20 minutes later, everyone reported the same. No source of the blood anywhere. That's when Dad got really concerned. See, the thing about Molly's doorframe, about all the doorframes in our house, was how unusually tall they were. The ceilings in that old Victorian were almost 12 feet high, with doorframes reaching almost 8 feet. "Even if one of you wanted to pull a sick prank," Dad said, "I don't see how you could reach that high." To prove his point, he brought the tallest stool from the kitchen and placed it in front of Molly's door. Then he called Jake, who was the tallest of us kids at 5'10". "Try to touch the top of the doorframe," Dad instructed. Jake climbed onto the stool and stretched his arm as high as he could. His fingertips barely brushed the middle of the doorframe, a good 6 inches below where the blood smears started. One by one, Dad had each of us try. Even he and Mom could barely reach the top, and they'd have had to stand on tiptoes on the stool to do it. "So, if none of us could reach it without a ladder," my sister Abigail said slowly, "where did the blood come from?" That's when my little brother Sam, who was only 6, started crying. "Is it a monster? Did a monster put blood on Molly's door?" "There's no such thing as monsters," Dad said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. Mom suddenly gasped. "The children. We need to check all the children." For the next hour, my parents methodically examined each of us. They checked our scalps, between our toes, inside our ears, anywhere blood might have come from. Nothing. Not a single scratch or cut that could explain it. Dad even got the ladder from the garage and examined the ceiling around Molly's door, thinking maybe the blood had dripped from above. The ceiling was pristine white. "Could an animal have gotten in?" Jake suggested. "Like a bat or something?" Dad shook his head. "There's no splatter pattern. These are deliberate smears, hand smears." I remember standing in that hallway, staring at those dark streaks, feeling this creeping dread work its way up my spine. The blood almost seemed to pulse in the light, like it was still alive somehow. "Everyone's sleeping in the living room tonight," Mom announced. No one argued. We dragged mattresses downstairs and huddled together like we were camping, except there was nothing fun about it. Dad stayed up all night in his armchair, a baseball bat across his knees. I don't think any of us slept more than a few minutes at a time. The next morning, Dad called in sick to work and sent us all to school except Molly, who refused to go back into her room. While we were gone, he took samples of the blood and scrubbed the door frame until the wood was almost white again. A week later, Dad's buddy, who worked at the hospital, had run some unofficial tests on the blood. What he told us made everything worse. It was human blood, type AB negative. None of us have that blood type, not a single person in our family. In the days that followed, my parents came up with every possible explanation. Maybe someone broke in. Maybe one of us had a friend over who got hurt and decided to play a sick joke. Maybe the blood had been there for years and we somehow never noticed it, even though it was still wet when we found it. The explanations got wilder and more desperate. Dad even suggested that maybe one of us was sleepwalking, but it didn't explain how any of us could reach that high or where so much blood came from without leaving a trace on the person who did it. We never found an answer. 2 months after the incident, we moved. Dad claimed it was because he got a better job offer closer to the city, but I knew the real reason. None of us felt safe in that house anymore. The worst part came the night before we moved. I was packing up my books when Molly came into my room. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, with dark circles under her eyes. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. "But you can't tell Mom and Dad." She told me that every night since finding the blood, she'd been hearing scratching sounds above her ceiling around 3 in the morning. Not like mice or squirrels, but deliberate, slow scratches that would move from one end of her ceiling to the other. "And last night," she said, her voice cracking, "I found this." She pulled up her pajama sleeve. On the inside of her forearm were 3 long, thin scratches, like someone had dragged their fingernails across her skin. They weren't deep, but they formed a deliberate pattern, almost like letters, though I couldn't make out what they spelled. "Did you do that to yourself?" I asked, not wanting to believe her. "No," she said, tears welling up. "I woke up with them. Marcus, I think whatever put the blood on my doorframe was trying to mark me somehow. We never told our parents about the scratches. What would be the point? We were leaving the house behind. Years passed and life went on. Most of my siblings don't talk about that night anymore. If it comes up at family gatherings, someone quickly changes the subject. It's like we collectively decided to pretend it never happened. But I can't forget. Sometimes I dream about that doorframe, except in my dreams, the blood forms words or faces. I wake up drenched in sweat, convinced for a few terrifying seconds that there's something in my room, watching me. I've researched similar incidents, spent countless hours on paranormal forums. Nothing quite matches what we experienced. Most blood phenomena are explained by mundane causes. Someone forgot, someone lied, someone played a prank, but not in our case. To this day, I still can't explain how human blood that didn't belong to anyone in our family, appeared high on a door frame that none of us could reach, leaving no trace of its source. Whatever happened that night followed us in ways I can't quite explain. 3 of my siblings refused to sleep in rooms with doors. 2 others developed severe insomnia. And me? I check the tops of every doorframe I pass through, every single time, because once you've seen something that defies all logical explanation, you never quite stop looking for it to happen again.